This is my Chicken City ultimate chicken coop setup, looking down from the top. So hopefully with this you can kind of see the big picture we got going on here. So in the middle we've got the chicken house with the pitched roof, and then we've got the chicken courtyard. If we go around in a clockwise direction, then we move where the solar panel is to our annual veg room. That's the one that's got all the big zucchinis and tomatoes and all the strawberries. Then we come around to the corner next to the greenhouse. That's the berry cage. That's where we've got 4 different types of berries, and we've also got 4 little chickens. Then coming to this corner here, this large corner, is the fruit room, where we've got cherries, we've got apples, we've got plums, we've got all the different herbs, the spearmint, the chives, the sage, and that's where the chickens spend most of their time in the year. And then we go to that front corner. That's the second annual veg room, but as we can see when we go down there, it has kind of turned into the raspberry room. But who could complain about the raspberry room?
Hello, Mr. Goat.
Today I'm going to take you on a tour of my ultimate chicken coop. Now, I did a couple of videos on these a couple of years ago that were really popular, but I have made some advantages, some upgrades. The plants are popping, so I'm really excited to show you. It is summer in Victoria, Australia, so we're in December. So this is my summer Chicken City garden. In we go. So we've got the double gate system to make sure we don't lose any chickies. Welcome to the madness. So we've got the Chicken City courtyard. Now this is where the ladies are always able to spend their days, and this is where I've got their food and their water. So this is like the middle, the central hub of the garden. And then around the garden, we've got the different rooms and the different doors that we interchange and let them in as we need. But this is always their home base. Now, this was just meant to be for the chickens, but I couldn't help myself, and I've added heaps of edible plants to the courtyard. And actually, I really love it because it then creates shade and enrichment for them. So when I first built the chicken coop, I actually had shade cloths over the top, because I wanted to keep the girls cool in summer. But since adding all the plants, I've got rid of the shade cloth, and so much better. Why would I have shade cloth when I could have a Feijoa tree? So let me show you that. Around here, we've got my Feijoa, and we can see it's got little flowers on it. So hopefully we actually get some fruit. Then we've got a fig here. There's the rooster letting us know who's boss. The fig tree, and there was a fig, but he's not looking very good. Then over here we've got my blackberry, and I love this, that I literally have blackberries growing on the wall of the chicken coop. You can see them there. They're just starting to ripe. These dark ones would be ready. The ones that have still got the red on the ends, they need maybe another week. Then we've got the lemon tree here, which doesn't have any lemons on it, but fingers crossed we're going to get some soon. That being an evergreen, I really like it in the chicken courtyard because it's always green, not going to lose its leaves, so always got that coverage for the girls to hang under if they need. We then have got the chicken house. Come in. This is where the girls sleep and where they lay their eggs. Now, when I did my first few videos on the chicken house, I actually had straw on the floor, and I have changed my views on this. I don't do straw in the chicken house anymore. I do this horse bedding stuff that's actually basically cat litter, and that is super absorbent and keeps the chicken house super dry and sucks up all the moisture from the chicken poo. I only have to change this about every 9 months, so it's super low maintenance. I would highly recommend. There's different brands called horse bedding or cat litter, but if you buy it as horse bedding, it's going to be a lot cheaper. And that starts as these pellets here. That's how it comes. And then as it absorbs moisture, it breaks down into this like sawdusty stuff. But it does a really good job of just soaking up and drying up all the poop, because the chicken bedding area is going to be filled with poop. So that is a new upgrade I've done. I've done it for about 12 months, highly recommend. Of course, we've got the egg system. Oh, you know what else I changed since I filmed in here last was the roosting bars. I had the beautiful wooden branches that I'd harvested from around the property. I loved those, but what I found was the chicken sleeping on the top would poo down on the roosts underneath, and I hated cleaning them. So I replaced it with something a lot less attractive but more practical, just with, what do you call it, like corner braces and scraps of wood, and angled them in a way that the chickens can climb up the system to get to the top, but when they poo, they don't hit any of the other rails. So that's a little upgrade I've done that I think makes the chicken house more functional, less cleaning for me, and that is what I'm all about. Got some eggies. Just the morning collection. Wonder, they've also started laying on this, which was meant to be their sleeping setup, but anyway. And then this here is my sick bay cage. When I first started having the chickens, I'd have the sick bay cage up in a shed, but I've realized over time that when you want the sick bay cage, you want it right now. So I leave this permanently in here, and then I can set that up with food and water and anything that a sick chicken or an injured chicken needs, that they can see their friends, they can feel like they're amongst it, they know they're still at home, but they've got unlimited access to their needs, and none of the other chickens can peck them or bully them. If I need to put medication in their water, they're the only chicken that can drink that water. So it's a really handy addition. And sadly, it gets used quite a lot, because chickens, you know, lots of things can go wrong, and especially when you've got 25 of them. Back to the courtyard here, I've got my compost base system. You can see these 2 bins are actually full, and we've got some beautiful compost. So this is ready to use in the garden. But in the meantime, what I can do is I can dig up bits, and if I get down low enough, I should get some worms. See, there we go. And then this is a really easy source of protein for the chickens that they love. Yeah, look at her go. They'll find them all. So you just got to dig down a little bit, because the worms are smart and they won't sit at the top knowing the chickens are going to come for them. Look, there's some in there. How about that? So I leave them up so they can scratch the top, and then I'll get a shovel and kind of mix it up just to distribute things and get some goodness to the top. Another little addition I've made is these safety hooks. So when I first had the compost bins, I would leave them open, but I'd be scared that when there was a strong wind, they could come back down and hit a chicken. And the wind had actually blown them before, so it wasn't ridiculous. Anyway, by adding this system, when they're up like this, I know even if a breeze did come, it's not gonna cause them to come down. So then I just take them off. Well, they're not gonna want me to put this one down, but I can put this one down like that. Well, you know, when there's not half-chewed silver beet getting us in the way. So I've also got my passion fruit here, which I am obsessed with as a shade plant in your chicken coop, because the passion fruit vine, look at all these, just teeming with fruit. This here is a passion fruit flower. He will turn into, or she will turn into the fruit. This is a really, really great plant to have in your chicken coop for so many reasons. One, it's a climber. So as long as you can protect the root base, once it's up off the ground, the chickens can't do damage to the plant, like I've got here. That's going to offer brilliant shade for the chickens, and the passion fruit's getting brilliant sun, which is why I've got so many fruit on there. It's also an evergreen, so it's going to stay green and beautiful and provide shade all year round, and kind of that lush green chicken coop that we're going for. So I'd highly recommend the passion fruit vine. One thing to know about them is that they only fruit for about 7 years. So once you've had it for 7 years, you just need to rip it up and plant another one, which is a bit of a pain. I've done that once since building the chicken coop, and it was a bit sad for 1 year not having a big vine, but you can see like this was only planted maybe a year or two ago. It's grown really fast and very lush. Actually, come with me around here. So in this corner, we've got another passion fruit vine, despite the fact that these two look like they're seamlessly joining. And he is really taking over the corner, but given my love of the passion fruit in the chicken coop, I am all for it. I have a bit of an approach of the strongest edible plant wins. So if you're giving me fruit, like the passion fruit is, I will let you go nuts. He's over the lemonade here. That's little Jack. The lemonade tree here, and we can see we've got some fruit. Now, chickens aren't meant to eat citrus, but I find that they're actually very good at knowing what they can and can't eat, so I have no qualms about growing citrus in the chicken coop. And citrus is a plant that needs a lot of nutrients. It's a really heavy feeder, so having it in the courtyard here where the chickens are going to walk all around it and poo all around it is going to ensure that my citrus is constantly fed. And if you look at the citrus I've got in here versus citrus I've got other places in the garden where there are no chickens, the ones in Chicken City do way better, and I'm certain it's because of that constant feeding from the chicken poo. One thing you have to know though when you're planting trees in your chicken coop is the chickens are going to scratch up those roots like nobody's business, and they will kill the plant. What you've got to do is protect the roots, and this is how I do it, with the bricks. So they're spaced enough that any weeds that come up, the chickens can easily access and peck, but they are close enough that they can't get in there with their claws and scratch up. So giving it that root perimeter is going to keep the plant happy and weeded, and the chickens are going to be happy too, and they can kind of fertilize in between. So that brick placement is going to be your best friend with trees. The other option for protecting the plants from the chickies is like what I've got with my blueberry here. I must admit my blueberry is not looking very happy all of a sudden, but you can see that was what would have once been a little blueberry. We've had some very strong heat and wind, and I wonder if that's his issue. But you can see we've got the wire, so that's another way to protect your plants. And the reason I wired him is because when he was really little, even if I had have bricked around the base, the chickens still would have been able to absolutely ruin the plant. So I had wired him. Now that he's this size, I should probably take the wire around and just go back to the bricks. Because I want to give the chickens as much access as possible to the base of the plant. One, so they can do their fertilizing, and two, so they can do their weeding. So this is my silky room, and it's got some silky chickens in it, but some other breeds. It's for my sensitive chickens. So this flock out here of about 20 can get a bit rowdy and a bit competitive over the food. So anyone that needs a little extra TLC goes in this room. So let me introduce you. There's 4 chickens in here at the moment. It was meant to be 4 girls, but as little Rosie here has grown up, we've realized that she's a boy. So we now have 2 roosters. There's one of them, but we keep them separate at all times because they would absolutely biff on, and I know who would win, and it's not little Rosie the rooster. So we've got that passion fruit continuing along this wall here. So something I'm really keen on with the chicken coop is utilizing the walls as not just separation for the chickens, but also having a function in the garden. So It does separate them very successfully, and and clearly we need to separate them, but also it acts as a really strong trellis for the passion fruit vine. North is this way, so the sun comes in this way. So by having this passion fruit vine, we're actually shading the chickens in this room here. So this is not just my sensitive chicken room, it's also my berry room. Okay, you guys need to stop. If we come around here, this is all caneberries. We've got loganberries, tayberries, blackberries, boysenberries along the side here. So we've got 4 different types all being grown, and they produce such a nice canopy to have as shade for the chickens, but also by keeping the berries up. And you can see I roughly tie them up with string and chains. That makes sure that the chickens cannot eat all the berries. They can get the ones at the low height, but they won't get the bulk of the harvest. So it's like some for the chickens, lots for us, everyone's happy. We actually harvested in this room yesterday, and there was about 4 of us going for over an hour, and we absolutely decimated the berries, got kilos and kilos. So it's probably not looking as red and plump as it usually does, but it is truly impressive how many berries I can grow and harvest in this 6 odd meter long corridor. So for me, again, that double use, we've got the chickens are happy and we've got the berries super happy. Also because, like I talked about earlier, we've got the chickens constantly pooing on the ground under the berries. So these plants are being fertilized every single day. So I don't feed any of these plants additionally, and the amount of fruit they pump out is huge. That's because the chickens are doing my job for me. Also underneath, there's never a weed under my berries. So my berries aren't competing with any other plants to grow because the chickens have got the weeding down pat. Again, then they've got the canopy, which is keeping them cool. So everyone wins. And I don't have any wild birds coming down, picking my berries before I do, because as you can see, the roof is meshed in. So chickens are safe, berries are safe, everyone's winning. The secret with berries and chickens, and I did a whole separate video on this because there is a secret, you have to make sure the root ball that shoots out the new canes is protected. Otherwise the chickens will eat that and you'll never get the cane for next year's berry growth. But again, I've done a whole video on that. So if you're interested in this system, watch that in more detail. See how I've got the wire around there.
So the wire's to stop the chickens?
Yeah, so the wire is so when this plant shoots out new canes, which will produce next year's berries, shoots up these sticky green things. There's a new one there. The chickens would kill that at the onset, but once the cane's kind of up and over, they're not going to be able to do damage to the base. So the plant keeps regenerating itself, and then the chickens will like peck these leaves, as you can see, but they won't actually be able to like properly damage the plant. So it's like keeping the happy medium. Berries can be very weedy and they can actually get completely out of control. So the chickens actually help me keep the plant strong. And also if you look in my little house, I think there's someone laying an egg. Oh, there's 2 people laying an egg. We've got my little pallet house that I built here for these 4 chickens. It's got a couple of bins for them to lay eggs in, nesting boxes, and then a little roost for them. When I first built this, I was very concerned about how warm it was going to get in summer. So I had shade cloth over this corner of the garden. And then as the berries have grown, what I've done is I've kind of angled some of the canes to come up over the chicken house. So you can see here that this chicken house is in beautiful shade. It's protected the whole time. The chickens stay cool in there. And the shade they're getting is a natural canopy from the berries. So when you're designing your chicken coop and you're thinking about how things work together, think how, if I have a shade problem, then how can I solve that with a functional element of my garden? And I would much prefer to solve my shade problem with some beautiful loganberries than solving my shade problem with some shade cloth. Now, of course, when you're starting out, you're not going to have a massive berry canopy you can do this with. So at the start there might be things like shade cloth erected, but over time as the plants grow we can replace those things with more functional elements. This here is another little outhouse I have for the chickens. This is another little DIYer of mine, and it's not so important in the summer, but in the winter it's really important that the chickens can get out of the rain. And also I put their treats and their food in here as well, because you never want their food getting wet because then it can get moldy. This is another one that I would actually really like to have a functional shade element. So over time, what I'm attempting to do is train my boysenberry here to be the coverage element. By angling this over, my hope is this can become a plate of berries and provide shade cloth on top of that coverage. So this is the boysenberries. I love their fat little, I don't even know what you call these things, but they're amazing to eat. These guys aren't ripe yet. This is pretty crazy to walk around now, and admittedly it's not that easy, but I would always prefer more fruit than maintaining the paths, so I just bush bash down. But if you're going to do berries like this at home, what you have to remember is in winter this is going to need a very strong prune, and you've got to get your berry pruning right, because if you get it wrong you're going to actually not get fruit the next year. So look, there's some easy rules to follow, but basically once a cane has fruited once, so once an arm here, once an arm has fruited, it will never ever ever fruit again. This arm hasn't fruited, he will fruit next year. So we will keep him alive. These arms, for example, have fruited, so we're going to cut them off in winter. So if you want to do berries, they're amazing. I think they're actually a very easy edible crop to grow, but you have to be committed to the pruning. And I'm sure there's photos somewhere on my social media of once this is pruned, the whole thing looks completely naked. But you need to do that to regenerate the berry canes and let them fruit the following year.
Hello.
This is my annual veg room. And this is probably the biggest room in Chicken City, and this is where I grow all my annual veg. So we're talking your zucchinis, your tomatoes, your lettuces, your beans, your pumpkins, your salad, your capsicums. So this room gets turned over every 6 months odd. So what that means is in spring I will plant all the plants that you see here. These all went in spring, and then I will grow them big all through summer. I will harvest so much food from this room. Like I can produce tens and tens of kilos of food, maybe even hundreds of kilos just in this space over summer and autumn. Come the end of autumn, our annual crops have finished their run. So our beautiful zucchini here, he's gonna be done. He's finished. He's not gonna produce any more food. So at that point, I open the gate that you saw me come out and I let the chickens in. And they're all gonna come in and absolutely demolish what is left in this garden. So any plants, any flowers, any fruit that might have dropped, they're gonna smash it all down, they're gonna eat all the weeds. They're also going to turn the soil and dig it up. If there's any seeds in the soil, I probably don't want this because they're gonna be weeds in the next season. So the chickens will churn it and then eat it. So they are gonna do all the hard work that a garden needs to do to prepare their soil. The chickens are gonna do it for me. So I just leave that gate open, let them come in, and it probably takes them a month to turn this entire space over. And then once they've done that, I lock them out again and we can plant for the winter. And then we put in things like our cabbage, our kale, our salad greens. These are going to go in, coriander, parsley. So then I do my winter crops in here. Then at the end of spring, when I want to put my summer crops in, I then let the chickens back in again. We repeat the cycle, we plant it out. And this is a system I've been doing for about 10 years on that rotational. And I tell you what, it does such a good job because your soil is beautifully managed and prepared for when you want to plant it, and your weeding is done. So let me show you some of the food that I'm growing in here. Now, as much as I call this my annual room, the first thing I'm going to show you is not an annual. So this is the exception to the rule, but this is my strawberry patch here. These are my strawberry plants and they will fruit for about 4 years. Oh, this looks like a little white strawberry. See, it's got the red little seed bits on it. The strawberries here are also in pots, which I don't love gardening in pots if you don't have to. It's harder to maintain the water, it's harder to feed the soil, but I really like the strawberry plants in the self-watering pots. They do really well like that, and I do have it hooked up to a dripper watering system, so they are getting watered on a timer, so I don't have to think about it. The thing with the strawberries are, they're going to live for 3 or 4 years. So if I just put them here, left them here, and then let the chickens in, they would absolutely kill all my strawberries and there'd be no strawberries next year. So by having them in the pots, they're quite light and movable. So before I let the chickens in, I will actually take all these pots out of this room so the chickens can't get them. And then when the chickens are finished, and see, I've got them on that stand there. The reason I have them on the stand is strawberries really need a lot of sun to actually give you lots of strawberries. So I had them on the ground initially, but I found having them on the ground, they weren't getting enough sun and I wasn't getting as much fruit. I built this stand, it's literally just a pallet, and put the strawberries on, and since then I have got so much more fruit. So if your strawberries aren't fruiting, give them some height. It has killed my walkway, but like I said, I will prioritize food over mobility in the chicken house any day. These are my potato plants. The top parts are of no interest to us, but what's under the ground should be lots of fat, juicy King Edward potatoes, I believe. I really do need to mulch these up, which I haven't done, but you know, perfect world, we would have done it. Hopefully I'll get round to it. The more you mulch up your potatoes around this green stem, the more potatoes you're gonna get. Back to the strawberries. The other way I grow strawberries that gives them height and stops the chickens ruining them is the vertical wall. I love, love, love having the wall used for a functional purpose, not just a wall. So it's protection, but it's also a beautiful vertical garden here. I do think the strawberries are not as happy in these hanging baskets as they are in the self-watering pots I showed you earlier, but you know, it's all about experimenting. What does work really well here is the massive amount of sun they get. So you win some, you lose some. This is also hooked up to watering systems, because if I had to water all this manually, this would be a full-time job in itself. So the vertical wall gets really hot. We have to manage the water, but the watering system does that. Here we've got the zucchinis, just your classic Black Beauty zucchini in here. We do have some weeds coming up around, but a lot of them are actually edible because so often the seeds I'm introducing into the garden, see here, this is a flower that will turn to seed and become a weed, but actually this is an edible Mitsuna salad leaf. So sometimes I'll leave the weeds depending on what they are because we can eat them. These we cannot eat and they need to be pulled out. So there are definitely some in there that aren't, but just remember, just because you didn't plant it there doesn't mean it's not something that you could eat. Along this line here, we've got 2 tomatoes. These guys, I can't remember what type they are, but we've got some little pear-shaped tomatoes coming up. And again, on that weed discussion, this I didn't plant, but here's a mustard leaf, delicious salad leaf. So, you know, I'm gonna leave him and I'm gonna harvest him and enjoy him. The nasturtiums planted all around. Here's some nasturtium leaves and nasturtium flowers. They are a really good, what I call a cover crop. So when we put the tomatoes in, there's a lot of space in between, and if we don't do something with that space, weeds are going to come up. So by letting the nasturtiums go around, they're going to cover that soil and actually prevent other things coming up. So throughout my annual garden, you will see huge amounts of nasturtiums, and with the double use, not only are they going to protect the ground and stop the weeds coming up, they're edible. So we can eat the flowers and the leaves in salads, and they look beautiful. And if we don't eat them, the chickens love eating them. So we've got, and actually the goats love eating them too. So we've got so many purposes for this one crop that we've just intermingled throughout all our veggies. Another veggie we've got here utilizing the vertical space is our zucchini. This is a Tromicino zucchini. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing it right. These here will become little, well actually they'll become very big zucchinis. Oh, here's one that you can kind of see it's starting to be a zucchini. I planted him there because I want him to grow up and utilize this vertical space here. And then the zucchinis will hang down. This is the only type of trellising or trailing zucchini there is that I know of, but I love growing it because the zucchinis are delicious and we can utilize that space. You can see this guy over here is the same thing. He was planted the same day from the same seed batch as the guy that you just saw earlier, but my suspicion is that this soil must be more nutritious, potentially getting better water and potentially getting better sun, because this is a beautiful monster. We can see the glorious zucchini flowers here. We can see some big zucchinis forming. And by adding this arch to the garden, I can utilize space up that wouldn't be otherwise utilizable. And you can see the sun that this plant is getting is glorious. And when it comes to veggies, the more sun, the more veggies. Now in here, which is actually where Mr. Big Zucchini is coming from, we've also got some beautiful capsicums and chilies. Now this here is a greenhouse that I've taken the top off. What do you call it? Not a greenhouse, it's got a special name. It'll come to me as soon as we stop filming this. It's like a cover that you put over. But what I love doing is taking the lid off and then leaving it there, so it's offering protection to these capsicums that otherwise are quite sensitive to wind, and when they're younger, quite sensitive to the cold. So by having this there, it's almost creating a microclimate that's really warm and enables me to grow something like a capsicum when in my climate up here in the mountains, it's a bit dicey whether I can be able to grow something like chilies and capsicums. So if you can, think about ways you can artificially warm an area, or potentially, depending on where you live, you might be artificially cooling it. But this works very well to create the microclimate for the capsicums. As much as we've got flowers, no fruit just yet. Now, of course, we've got tomatoes in the garden. I've got one variety here that we're utilizing that vertical space. And then we've got another two along here. And we've got some little tomatoes forming. None ripe yet, unfortunately. To surround this area, again for the weeds, we've got the nasturtium. But I also planted a lot of lettuces around here. And you can see they are beautiful and ready to harvest. So even though the tomatoes need a lot of space to grow, we can be strategic with things like lettuces. When this tomato gets really big and maybe that lettuce would be too close, we're going to have eaten them already by then. So we can utilize that empty space in the meantime. What have I got behind me? Okay, behind me I've got some sunflowers. These I don't know why I grow them. They actually aren't really part of the food system, but I love them. And the chickens love the sunflower seeds when they're ready, and they're just so beautiful. So I've added them to the system. Behind that, we've got more zucchinis. And this is a different type. This is like almost like a squash, like golden ball zucchini. When it comes to the zucchinis, the black beauties that you saw earlier are going to they're going to be the most prolific, they're going to give you the most zucchinis, but with these other varieties, we can just add so much more fun to our plate in a way that you can't when you're shopping at the supermarket, because no supermarket is going to be selling your Trommacinos or your golden ball, I can't remember their name, but when you grow it yourself, you get access to all this produce that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. So as much as I'll grow the classic varieties of an ingredient, I also like to grow the more creative varieties as well. So we've got the little zucchini aisle. Another tomato over here. We've got some calendula around him, which is a really good crop to grow in and amongst your veggies, keeps the pests away, and the calendula flowers are edible. So we can sprinkle those petals in salads. This is getting a bit wild back here, but this here is actually pumpkins. So we've got some pumpkins, little ball pumpkins growing. And this fence that I'm on here is the other side of the berry room we saw earlier. So some of those berry canes are actually growing through onto this side. That is potentially a negative because they're going to create shade on my veggie beds here. So I do try and tie them back to make sure our pumpkin patch gets maximum sun. But I don't hate the fact that I've then got more space to grow berries. And you can see in the corner over there, by moving that cane and kind of tying him in the corner, I've actually got a whole arch of berries in a space that would otherwise just be completely unused in the garden. And same on this side here, we've got a corner that's pretty much unused. So by allowing the boysenberries to grow there, we're utilizing that vertical space and they're getting plenty of sun. And you can see the berries are looking plump and juicy and, you know, everyone's happy. The bed underneath it is actually in quite a lot of shade because of these berries, but I've utilized that by putting lettuces under there, which can do with a bit of shade in the warm weather that we've got at the moment. So it's not a negative having something in the shade, it's just you got to plant something different, factoring the shade in. This is the north gate of the chicken coop, and having the gates on the outside makes it so much easier because I can come and go and twirl in wheelbarrows and big bags of goat poo into the garden without the chickens getting under my feet. So I do have 2 gates external to the one main gate that you saw earlier. And we're going to go in here now and check out what I've got growing. So this room started as annual veg number 2. So this was designed for your broccoli, your zucchini, your tomatoes, your cucumbers, those veggies. And then what actually happened was I planted just a couple of raspberries along an edge to, again, utilize all the space I had. And then 2 years later, this is what we've ended up with, which is an entire raspberry patch. They have morphed and moved, and you know, it wasn't the plan, but when you've got raspberries in abundance, who's going to complain? So I've let them take over. Probably in a few years they will exhaust this spot and I might turn it back to veg, but I'm very happy with my abundant raspberries that I did not plant. I actually just planted them along that fence line there. The other thing that wasn't quite the plan, but I'm very happy I did, was planting this blackberry here. Now he produces so many blackberries. My mum and my sister have been harvesting these all morning and you can see there's still so many left on. He's actually planted in that corner down there between 2 garden beds. But what I was finding was that spot in the garden was getting very muddy and boggy. So obviously the watering system was draining into that corner. And I thought, okay, I've got a spot that's not in a garden bed, but it's getting beautiful watering. How can I utilize that? So I just put in a little blackberry plant in that corner and thought, we'll see what you do. And this is what he's turned into. So he's got ample sun, he's got ample water, and he produces a huge amount of berries. This room is exactly the same as my other veggie room in that for the most of the year, the chickens are locked out of the room. But then when I'm ready to turn it over and plant my next year's crops, I let them in. Now in this room, since the raspberries and the blackberries have taken over, I can really only let the chickens in winter, but for most of winter, they will have access to this room. And like I said earlier, they'll scratch it up, they'll eat all the weeds, they'll poo and fertilize all through it, and then they will have the soil ready for this abundant spring, summer, autumn crop that you're looking at now. Some of the other things popping up in this room are, we've got an apple tree. This is planted on the other side, but what I love is I've been able to use this fence to espalier it. So you can see the apples are sitting flush to the fence. We're not shading the raspberry beds and we're keeping it off the roof, but we're getting so much fruit across there. We've then got the passion fruit, of course, coming through. He is dominating the garden, but he is producing, so he's earning his keep. And then behind me here, we've got a juiceberry. Now, I had never eaten a juiceberry before I planted one, but I thought I've got pretty much every other type of berry covered, so we'll add him in. He also is not planted in a garden bed, he's shoved in the corner. The problem with him is he's pretty much blocked the gate out there to the chickens, so we might work on him. The other thing I won't let happen is the plants grow onto this roof, so I'm constantly pulling them down. Once they grow onto this roof, they will potentially damage it, but also any fruit that grows outside of the roof, I can't harvest it, so it's not really helping the situation. So I really am very, very firm on constantly pulling this plant down. If these plants had their way, the passion fruit would be covering this entire roof, the apple tree would be sticking up through, and the juiceberry would probably have demolish that whole corner. So you constantly have to be here pulling it down, getting the secateurs and keeping your roof line trimmed. I didn't do that the first year of gardening and I paid the price, so learn from my mistake. This garden bed right behind me had radishes and carrots and a few other root vegetables, and we just harvested them. So what we've done is planted them out with cucumber seedlings and basil seedlings. And then this kind of mulchy layer here is from the chicken courtyard. So this is a mix of their straw and their wood shavings and lots of their poo. So that's going to feed these plants and also keep the moisture in the ground and stop the weeds coming up. So we've got one item, the chicken sawdust, being used to manage the chicken poo and create a good environment for them, but then also being used in the garden here to mulch, keep the moisture in, stop the weeds coming up. So one item being used in so many places. It is a bit of a pain scooping it into a bucket and putting it in the garden bed, but I mean, I'm only walking 3 meters with it. Then over here, we've got my grapevine. This also was a semi-new addition. He wasn't part of the original plan, but he pumps out so many beautiful grapes at the end of autumn. So I'm really happy with this. And by having it in the chicken coop, the birds aren't going to eat our grapes. We're actually going to get to harvest a good amount. And like all the plants in here, when the chickens do come in, they get to scratch around under the grape. There'll be fallen grapes on the ground, so they'll get to eat those up, and that's going to help me manage fruit fly and any other pests that will be attracted to the rotting fruit. And then they're going to poo, fertilize the grape, and we're going to have beautiful grapes for the next year. Oh, we've got that. This is the end of my broccoli harvest. Now, I've always been someone that plants broccoli in autumn and harvests it throughout winter and early spring. It's been a really key staple plant of my winter garden. But this year I thought I'm going to try it as an early spring plant, which is what I did. And I was very, very, very surprised with the results because I didn't have to manage cabbage moth and cabbage butterfly. So if you've had an issue with your brassicas and cabbage moth, cabbage butterfly, try an early spring plant for a late spring harvest like I've done with these. These now need to get all ripped out. You can see it's starting to go to seed, the broccoli, so I'm not going to get anything else that's particularly edible. So what I need to do now is rip out all these plants and plant something new. But the best thing about having chickens and a veggie garden together is that the chickens absolutely love these broccoli leaves. So this is like a waste product for us as broccoli growers. We're not going to eat the broccoli leaves, but the chickens absolutely love them. So with one plant, with one crop, I've got broccoli for me and I've got this beautiful cruciferous green for the chickens. So I feel like nothing is ever wasted, everything is utilized. And also otherwise I'd have to compost this, I'd have to process it. So I don't even have to worry about that because the girls are going to do it for me. So I'll pull them out. Maybe I'll plant more cucumbers here. Whew, there you go.
Found ourselves a wild Ellen. We put her in the garden.
Just taking a break from all that berry harvesting. This is proof I did some work.
Hello. Hello, beautiful. While we've been filming today, my mum and my sister Ellen have been harvesting from the garden, and I thought I'd show you what they've got. So we've got an obscene amount of blackberries from the room that you just saw with my last minute blackberry edition, some beautiful basil, and some beautiful beans. We've got wax beans, green beans, and there's purple ones somewhere down here. So there is just always food being pumped out of this system. Actually, the most annoying part, or the most time consuming part, I think, is harvesting it all, picking all the berries, picking all the beans, but I mean, it's clearly worth it. This is a door that also is doubling as a passion fruit trellis. So this door is to my fruit room, and sometimes I have it open so the chickens can come in, and then other times I have it closed actually, not often I have it closed, but sometimes I'll close it just to let some of the weeds come back up. So when the chickens come in, they've got more to forage. But we can just close that one. This room is filled with all my fruit trees and a few herbs on the bottom. So this is really where the chickens do spend the most of their time because they can't do a lot of damage to these established trees. But now these trees are big, the chickens can try all they like and they're not going to do any damage. So we'll walk you around and I can show you all the different trees and a few other ways that I keep this space super green and lush, even though there's 20 chickens in here, probably 10 months of the year. So here we've got the plum tree. We can get in close and see there's lots of green little plums there. And as that fruit ripens, I will harvest lots of it and enjoy it, but some will drop to the ground and then the chickens can go nuts and clean it up. If you've got rotting fruit dropping to the ground and you're leaving it there, this can be a really attractive thing for fruit flies and other kind of pests you don't want in your garden. So by having the chickens do that job for me, I don't have to think about the fallen fruit, but the chickens have it under control and they get plums or other fruit. So they're happy as pigs in shit. Now on the bare patches of ground between the trees, in the past I just left it bare and the chickens would really dig it up a lot, and I don't think it's a good use of space having a garden bed with empty spots. So what I've done is I've started putting these baskets over the top of certain patches of ground, so then things can grow underneath and the chickens can keep them hair cutted at this level, but the plants will survive. You can see the little grass here is poking through. They will continuously mow that and keep that square perfect, but the plants will continue to regenerate. Here I had lettuces growing underneath and then I lifted this up and let the chickens clean underneath it. So you can see that's why there's nothing growing now. Then I put it back down. Those plants will rejuvenate. The chickens can't eat them yet, but then, you know, take this off and they've got access. So here's another way that I keep the chickens kind of off certain parts of the garden, is just a simple mesh wire wrapped around. And then the base of the plant, this is thyme here, the base of the plant is inside the mesh, and then the plant can continue out. They can eat it if they want, but they can't scratch up the root system. They have actually knocked that off just in the last couple of days, so I need to tie that back. But generally speaking, if I create a barrier, they won't go past it. I've got another one on this side where I'm growing my spearmint. And the spearmint comes through and they do eat some of it, but most of the roots are contained on this side so that they can continue to thrive. I can continue to harvest my my spearmint, but the chickens can kind of luxuriate around the main plant. This is a boysenberry that I added to this room quite recently, and it's doing really well. It's giving us lots of boysenberries, but it is spiky as hell, so I'm not sure if this was the right spot for it, but I'm always looking at any spot I've got a little hole. It's like, how can I plug it with a plant? And my vision was to have the boysenberry trellised across that back wall there behind the fruit trees, behind the plum and behind the apricot here. Now whether that will happen, I'm not sure at the moment, but that was the vision. It would happen if I was firm with the plant, but as you can see, I've let the plant kind of come forward here, so I would need to really get in there with a pair of gloves and manage it. And then we move back and we've got the apricot. Underneath the apricot, so here I've got another basket. These are just old baskets from wardrobes that I find at Hard Rubbish, or I picked up a few at the tip, and I just turned them upside down in the garden and put a peg in them so they kind of don't move around too much. And then the plant underneath can grow up and through, like this comfrey has here. Now comfrey is such a good plant to have in your chicken coop because it's super healthy for the chickens to eat, and it's also a compost accelerant, so you can cut off these big leaves, put them in your compost, and it's going to process the compost a lot faster. You have to be really careful when you plant comfrey because it can become so weedy and it can absolutely take over an area like you wouldn't believe. So I'd be very cautious to tell someone to plant comfrey in their veggie patch if they didn't have chickens. But because we've got the chickens, this plant, and I planted it like 10 years ago, has never been able to spread past this point. And in fact, I have to put a basket on it just to keep it alive because the chickens would kill it. So it's a brilliant way that we can access the comfrey plant. We can have it in our garden, but we don't have that risk of it turning into a weed, because it's very hard for things to turn into weeds when you've got 20 chickens chewing on them. And you can see there's a little comfrey coming up here, and it's probably no coincidence he's coming up there because the chickens aren't able to scratch at him like they would be in this main area. So they can just scratch this straight up as soon as something establishes roots. Whereas because this brick's here, he's been able to shoot up in that little gap between the apricot tree and the brick because he's protected from the chickens. So adding more bricks to your garden, like we see we've got one here, and then it's no coincidence that the spearmint is coming up along that little edge between the brick and the garden bed because the chickens can't scratch it. So anytime you see bricks, like in a Hard Rubbish or whatever, pick them up and just chuck them around the garden. The more you have, the better the plants are going to cope with the chickens. So while I'm down on the ground here, we've got wormwood. This is another one that's really good to grow when you've got chickens because it actually acts as an anti-parasitic for them. So it's like a worming treatment, and they will eat this when they need it. They'll peck on the leaves, and you can also chop it up and put it in their food, and that's going to be like a dewormer for them as well. So I like having that in the chicken coop. This plant can also get very large and out of control, so having it in a spot where the chickens are accessing it often means that it's not going to turn into an absolute monster like it could. I had a basket over it when it was a bit smaller to protect it, but since it's been about this size, I've taken the basket off and the chickens haven't killed the roots. So Fingers crossed it stays that way, but probably what I need to do is circle it with those bricks like I do everything else. The cherry tree, this is one of my favorites. It produces beautiful, big, dark, juicy cherries around Christmas. We've actually harvested most of them, but there's still quite a lot on the tree. And the chickens love coming in here when I'm harvesting the cherries, because as I'm picking them, inevitably some will pick to the ground, and that is just a chicken's best dream, a rain of cherries onto the ground. People are concerned that cherry pips are poisonous, which they are, but I actually find that the chickens, maybe because they're so well fed here, they never ever try and eat anything that they kind of shouldn't. So I wouldn't worry about having a cherry tree in your chicken coop. Along this side here, I've got my apple trees. This behind me is a gala, and I planted one of the first trees ever in Chicken City when I was very new to this, and I made a mistake with him. I should have cut him off right down low, so he created a very short and stout tree. I should never have let this central stem get as long as it has, because it means that this tree is very top heavy and it's very near the roof of my chicken coop. So fast forward a couple of years, I got this apple tree, and you can see I cut his central stem so far down, about hip height, and now all his branches and his top heavy fruitingness are at this height. So it makes it so much easier for me to manage. It stops any damage to the roof. So if you're going to put the fruit trees in, cut them down really low. So that is probably one of the lowest apple trees you're going to see. And he's got beautiful apples on him. With this guy behind me that I said I let get too tall, the way I've managed him is espaliering those arms of him across the wall of the chicken coop. And you saw that from the other side when we were in the veggie room. And to complete my green wall, we've got the passion fruit coming through. So we've been able to utilize that whole back wall to have apples and passion fruit, also having the fruit in front. And then underneath, I've got some wire around chives and other herbs. So it's a 3-layer effect of one area in 3D growing so much food. So that's the 4 rooms with the central component that is Chicken City. And then we're standing in this big paddock here, which you probably can't even fully see the size of. And in this paddock, we've got Remy the goat, his little sister, and Big Tony the pony. And they play a really integral part in managing the whole Chicken City ecosystem. So they live around Chicken City, and they will graze on all the weeds and grasses and daisies that come up. So this is a really important way that a really easy way I can maintain my weeds around the edible garden, especially when it comes to really invasive species like wild blackberries. Also, the goats do lots of poo in this paddock, and I can scoop it all up, put it in my compost, and then use it to fertilize the veggies. So it's one aspect of the garden that actually has so many benefits to my overall food system. And not to mention, I love and adore them, and they are the best pets. Come on, let's go down here. Come on, yay!